and welcome. Excuse me, I don't know what this is, man. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our HASS September 2021 monthly meeting. I know that many of us were hopeful that we would be able to meet in person at the Miller Auditorium for today's meeting. But as you know from a recent Constant Contact and the September newsletter, the COVID subcommittee decided to postpone our return to the auditorium. We are continuing to be hopeful that in time we will be able to resume our monthly meetings in person. We will continue to monitor data and protocols from the Ottawa County Health Department and the college. Also, as relayed to you, the decision for our return to the auditorium will be made on a monthly basis using pertinent information that is available at the given time. We are grateful that our presenters have been flexible about giving their programs either in person or via Zoom. We are also grateful for your understanding and support of the decisions that have been made over the past 18 months as we moved through the ups and downs of the pandemic. As we return to in-person classes, your cooperation in adhering to mask requirements and social distancing will be greatly appreciated. We encourage unvaccinated members to take advantage of participating in classes via Zoom, as we all strive to stay safe and care for each other until all of us can be together again. As we near the end of September, watch for an announcement about the October monthly meeting. The program for October will be a bit of a respite from the current issues we read and hear about every day. Instead, it's going to focus on music, which for many of us has been a comfort during the pandemic.
Where do I go for that?
Our presenters from the brass band of Battle Creek will tell us about the organization, its history, facts about the musicians, their ongoing educational youth programs, and finally, they will share some of their live performances. I am sure it will be an enjoyable and uplifting program. As you know, tomorrow is opening registration day for the fall curriculum term. Hopefully you have had a chance to review the course catalog and make your choices. Please refer to the instructions for registering that came with the catalog. Remember that registration for the term is divided into 2 periods, so that right now you will only be able to register for classes that are scheduled in September and October. I know that many of you have not seen our new facility, which includes a spacious and attractive welcoming area in addition to the classroom. When you do attend an in-person class and make your way to the classroom, be sure to notice the beautiful library area. This week's HASP happenings showed a picture of the library area and informed us that a group of members have been diligently sorting and arranging our collection of books and DVDs. Soon there will be signage put up to help us find books that we enjoy and want to read. And in the future, there will be special displays. So keep watching the monthly newsletter for more library news. Also, last week, the Special Events Committee held an outside event in the garden of the Saugatuck Douglas History Center. It was a lovely setting and a beautiful summer evening as we enjoyed refreshments and in-person socializing. Thank you very much to the committee for a wonderful late summer fling. And now there are just a few spots, 10 spots as of yesterday, left for the Lincoln Sites bus trip, which is scheduled for September 27 through 29. If you are interested in going, please make your reservation today by emailing or calling Susan at the HASP office. The deadline for making your reservation is September 13. The September newsletter contains several service opportunities. You also received a constant contact yesterday, which listed specific opportunities available to interact with Hope students. These volunteer opportunities have always been a favorite for our HASP members. If you have not participated in them before, you might like to consider doing so this year. If you are interested, please check the September newsletter or yesterday's email for contact information. And now it's time to meet and greet this morning's guests, and Doug Walvard, our membership chairman, will do the honors.
Thanks, Barb. What a great morning. According to my computer, there are 138 of us on Zoom together this morning. I think that's a record, and I think that's wonderful. Well, we have the pleasure this morning of introducing and giving a HASP welcome to 13 guests. And I'm going to read your names off, and I apologize in advance if I mispronounce anybody. But we're really glad to have with us Linda Belgiano, Nancy Berg, David Bickle, Karen Gorehouse, Anna and Rich Hiskus, Dennis Ichabone, Kathleen Kennedy, Jane Snyder, Carol Swarthout, Judy Tuttle, Corinne, and Stephen Vandermolen. Welcome to all of you. We're really so happy that you could spend time with us this morning. I'm really glad you're here, and we hope each one of you will go on to become members and enjoy all the wonderful opportunities that HASP gives us. Also, a special thanks to our HASP members who invited you to be here. That's so important. Our membership number now is just a little over 700. Got a little ways to go to catch up with pre-pandemic levels, but I'm sure we will. But I would encourage everyone, anybody you know or come across you think might want to be a member of HASP, talk it up, tell them about us, call the office, better yet, bring them to a monthly meeting like today, and hopefully they'll want to join us and again, enjoy what we have to share with them and so forth. Anyway, thanks very much.
Thanks, Doug. And thank you to the 13 guests who are here with us. And as Doug said, it's so important for members to reach out to new people in the community or just people who you think will be interested in joining us. So thank you very much. And we look forward to hopefully our guests will become new members as well. And now Marilyn Schmidt, a member of the monthly program committee, will introduce this morning's speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. I am delighted to welcome today's speaker, Rebecca Skipper. Rebecca's passion is to help individuals experience wholeness in their places of work. As an experienced facilitator and educator, Rebecca serves as the primary instructor, curriculum designer, and executive director for Opportunity Thrive. She is trained in mindfulness, restorative practices, trauma-informed practices, PBL, design thinking, cognitive coaching, leadership, leverage leadership, and writing and reading workshop. As a former educator and instructional coach, she has a deep background in working with small and large groups to facilitate goal-oriented growth. In her current role, she trains and coaches educators from across Michigan to discover the pathways through their stress, and she equips districts and schools to transform their cultures to be healthier places for all to work and thrive. On a personal note, Becca is a graduate received her bachelor's degree at Wittenberg University and her master's at Aquinas. And on an even more personal note, I am delighted that she and her husband and wonderful family are my next door neighbors. Becca, welcome this morning to HASP.
Thank you, Marilyn. I'm just excited to be with all of you here today and to have the opportunity to share some of this work that we are really passionate about in our organization. And I know that for many of you, I was given kind of the heads up that there's many retired educators on this call. And so I just want to say, first off, thank you. Thank you for all of the years that you served in our schools and for the ways that you impacted our classrooms. And congratulations on making it to retirement from the school systems. And that's a really big accomplishment in many different ways. Also, on a personal note, just want to say hello to so many of you familiar faces that I know either personally or through different connections in the community. In particular, one face that I have not gotten to see in so long because of COVID. I just want to say hi, Esther. Good to see you on here. And so miss seeing your face as well. We're going to get started here today, and I'm going to share a presentation. And as we get going on here, please know that if you have questions, I will pause at one point after we go through a little bit of some data and understanding of the problem. I'll pause and answer any questions that we have in that space, and then we'll move on into kind of our space of solutions. So just to give you a sense of where we're going to go with this. So obviously you all know the title of this presentation is that the greatest threat to the thriving school is teacher burnout. And I want to tell you a little story to get us started. So about 6 years ago, I was working with a small group of high schoolers. I was asked to come in and be what we would call an authentic audience for them. And they were working on a problem that they were given by Grand Valley State University. And the problem that they were given was to improve or increase teacher recruitment. So increase the amount of high school students who were going to be going into the teaching profession. And they worked on this process for about 6 weeks around this issue. And at the end of it, they were going to be giving a presentation to a group of judges. And I was going to be coming in before they got to that group of judges to give them some feedback. Well, these poor students had me as their sort of authentic audience because this is obviously my passion area. And I came in and they presented to me and they gave me all of their, I would say, kind of gimmicky ways of getting people to go into teaching. And some of them were great ideas. Some of them obviously included financial incentives, which we all love financial incentives. But at the end of the presentation, I asked them, this group of 10 students, I said, okay, given all of the work that you've done over the course of these last 6 weeks, how many of you want to be teachers? And not a single student in that group of 10, after all of this work, raised their hand. And I said, why not? And I still remember this little kind of timid blonde girl in the front raising her hand. And I said, yeah, what do you think the reason is? And she said, well, to be honest, my teachers make it look like a miserable job. And that answer right there broke my heart, but it is the key to a lot of the work that we do. You see, I believe that the reason that our teachers believe or maybe come across as having a miserable job isn't the sole sort of responsibility of the teacher themselves, but rather there is a whole system, a whole structure around our teachers that is not supporting them in ways that allow them to thrive in the work that they're doing. And ultimately, the impact is on our kids. And so if we want to impact the ultimate sort of pathway for our kids to become teachers, to enjoy school, we have to look at the adults in front of them. So let's take a little deeper dive and understand what is it that is really the issues that are going on in education right now. So I'm going to throw at you a lot of data, and feel free to write down any of this data if it feels meaningful for you, but I will explain it as we go through it. So the first piece of data is to look at is just this pre-COVID data that we can understand. The first piece of data is to understand that we have some research that is showing that 93% of our teachers report experiencing high levels of daily stress. And when we think about that, we know that this research was done in 2018. It was done out of the University of Missouri. In 2016, the University of Pennsylvania did some research as well, and they found that that number was around 46%. So when I read this research from 2018 and saw it all the way up at 93%, that was a really big concerning jump for me. But we don't necessarily know if it's between 46 or 93%, but anywhere in between there is too high. And I'll explain why in just a little bit. We also know that here in the state of Michigan, we lose over 7,000 teachers to what we would say burnout. So reasons beyond retirement. These are teachers who are qualified to be in our classrooms, but are choosing to exit the classroom for reasons beyond retirement. We also know from research done in California that our teachers are experiencing what we would call secondary traumatic stress. And secondary traumatic stress are symptoms that we can measure in the psychological field. They would include things like high levels of depression, insomnia, inability to concentrate. Ultimately, they're similar symptoms to what we would say PTSD. And we know from research in California that in 6 schools, they measured the levels of secondary traumatic stress in those schools, and over 200 teachers had symptoms of secondary traumatic stress. These are teachers ultimately that we know are standing in front of our kids and are trying to be the regulators or the co-regulators of our kids. And so these symptoms are really getting in the way. We also know from research that replacing our teachers is very expensive. And from most recent research data, if we look at a more urban or suburban district, it is costing those districts about $21,000 for every teacher that they have to replace. So if you multiply that 21,000 out by that 7,000, right, we are spending an immense amount of money in our education system every year in replacing teachers. That is money that could go directly back to serving our students, and maybe even, I would argue, go back to supporting our teachers to be healthier and more effective in the classrooms. We know that 50% of those who are planning on quitting teaching say they're going to do so because of teacher stress. That it is not because of necessarily the financial impact. It's not because of, right, that 50% of our teachers are saying, I'm quitting because it is just too stressful. And that really brings us into our work as we look at it as an organization. We also know, and this is a really depressing couple of pieces of data for us. We know from the Gallup poll in 2015 that only 30% of our teachers reported being actively engaged in their job. That's a problem when we look at it, because we also know that teachers who are not actively engaged, those who are either disengaged or even what we would call actively disengaged, use 2.3 million more sick days or days of leave in a school year than teachers who are actively engaged. That is 2.3 million days that our students do not have their teachers in front of them, their qualified teachers in front. And as we look at this problem, we also know that we have a substitute teacher shortage as well. And so when we look at these data pieces, that 2.3 million days, sick days, is a real problem when we look at the substitute teacher shortage also. On top of this, we know that we are seeing a 66% decline in enrollment in teacher preparation programs in Michigan. And that's in the last, this decade between 2008 and 2016. That was when that measurement was done. And we have seen a record number of programs in our universities that have actually closed. Teacher preparation programs. And so we are really seeing that number impact both the programming that colleges and universities can offer, but then also we know that this 66% decline in enrollment is ultimately impacting this teacher shortage that we have across our country and our state right now. We recognize that by 2025, we're going to have well over 200,000 jobs that we are not going to be able to fill with qualified teachers in our country. That is licensed, certified teachers in that subject area. We are not going to be able to fill about 200,000 jobs across the country. That's a really significant issue when we look at ultimately who is being impacted by that. And that's our next generation, that's our students. We know that we're losing about 19 to 30% of our new teachers within those first 5 years due to teacher stress or burnout. They get into the occupation, they say, hey, this is just more stressful or not what I expected regarding the stress. And so they leave the profession entirely. So you combine that 30% who leave within the first 5 years and that 66% decline, and we're really looking at what we would say is a crisis of human capital in our school systems, that we do not have the people, the adults to stand in front of our kids and help them grow into that next generation who we want them to be, right? Those active learners, those lifelong learners that we need them to be in order to be active and productive citizens within our country. We know then that COVID certainly has not helped. And in May of 2020, we as an organization did some research here across the state of Michigan. We did a survey of teachers from across the state. And our research really showed some significant issues happening right in the midst of COVID. That we were seeing that 81% of our teachers were concerned about their peers burning out. 54% were experiencing sustained levels of daily stress, and we would actually call that toxic levels of stress. And then 43% of our teachers self-reported experiencing anxiety daily or often. And that anxiety can come in the form of either panic attacks in our classrooms or outside of our classrooms. It can come in the form of not feeling highly equipped to be able to meet the needs of their students on a daily basis as well. On top of that, one of the, I would say, most concerning pieces of data that came to us as an organization is that only 13% of our educators reported that they've utilized in the past or currently mental health professional support. So when we look at the 54% or even the 43% and the gap then with that 13%, we as an organization said that that is not okay. Our teachers need support. They need help sort of processing and navigating this stress right now. Launch Michigan also did a survey, and this is a think tank out of the Lansing area. And I'm going to just highlight a couple of the findings that they found here in 2021. When they asked educators from across the state, how much impact do these areas have on your level of satisfaction in education? There were some important and intriguing pieces of information that were brought out about this. Number one, they felt like the lack of support from policymakers and politicians was really high on their list of reasons why they are not satisfied in their profession. Number two, excessive workload, that they felt like the amount of work and their capacity to meet that workload, it was just too great. And then an overall lack of respect for the profession. And I think for a lot of us, we can maybe think of the days when education and being an educator was something that people held in high respect. And we are seeing now just a very a sharp drop, a sharp decline in the amount of respect that we have for educators in the profession. And that's being felt by those who are in our classroom spaces. And then number four is better salaries in other fields. And reduction in retirement benefits. And those last two, those are those financial pieces. And I have found when I talk with people in the community, oftentimes they assume that those are actually the top two, that teachers are not paid well enough. And we can agree on that. We can agree that teachers are certainly not making the amount of money that they deserve based on their level of impact and our general culture and society, and also in the amount of education that they obtain over the course of their lifespan. But if we really look at that, we understand that the top three have a much greater impact on whether teachers are feeling satisfied. And that has to do with both a sense of respect and a sense of control over their work. And as an organization, these top three are some of the things that we are deeply invested in as an organization in our work, both in advocating at the sort of political level and speaking with politicians on a regular basis about how do we support our educators in the work that they are doing. And then we are also working on increasing the level of just general understanding of the workload that teachers have, the amount of respect that we need to carry for teachers and hold for teachers in their occupations. And then we are invested in working with schools to help equip teachers with a sense of control over the amount of work that they have, to create the boundaries that they need to create over their workload. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a bit. We also found that, if we looked at the solutions-based, they asked, how much of an impact would these different things create in showing respect for you as an educator? So number one was increasing educator salaries. And so that is an important one that we know and we can recognize, that educators know that they need to make more money, that in order to have education as an occupation that they can have to sustain themselves and their families over the long haul, increasing educator salaries is very important. But if we look at the next ones, then these are areas that we as an organization feel like we can really invest in as well. Using more input from educators in policy decisions, empowering classroom educators with more choice about what and how they teach, creating additional supports in and out of school to address problems like poverty and trauma that make it hard for students to learn, improving culture and leadership at the building level. And then finally, creating hybrid teaching leadership roles to promote career development of teachers without having to leave the classroom entirely. These are areas that teachers have named that could make a great impact in showing more respect for them as educators in their profession. And as an organization, we really have invested in those four that we have highlighted, and I'll speak to those when we get into some of the solutions that we believe are really important when we talk about this issue of teacher burnout. So over the next 2 or 3 years, these are maybe kind of issues that we need to really look at, because in the next 2 or 3 years, Launch Michigan found that only about 66% of our educators want to stay in their job. That instead we look at them saying, work in education, but moving to a different school and district. And I'll talk a little bit about the impact of that. We have about 10% of our educators in the next 2 or 3 years who are saying they are just going to leave the field entirely. And then about 14% who have said that they're planning on retiring right away. So if we look at that, that means that we have roughly a quarter of our teacher population in the next 2 or 3 years that plans on exiting the profession. And that is and could be a huge crisis for us here in education. And then when we look at whether educators themselves are recommending the profession to the next generation, we've seen maybe a slight increase of about 6% between 2019 and 2021. And I think maybe it's because educators are realizing that we need them. I think educators themselves are feeling the crunch of the shortage in their schools, and so are recognizing the importance of suggesting and recommending it to the next generation. But even when we look at that, that means still only 31% of our educators are recommending teaching to the next generation. And that is a significant issue for us when we look at how teachers were maybe recruited before, that teachers used to suggest teaching as an occupation to their students, or whether it was a generational occupation in families where my mom was a teacher and therefore I'm a teacher, or my dad was a teacher and therefore I'm a teacher. That generational occupation is not happening in the field any longer. In fact, just anecdotally, we've heard across the state where we've had teachers say that they do not recommend teaching to their children. And we've had individuals who have said to us, in fact, that they've told their kids if they choose teaching, they will not help them pay for college, which is a pretty significant thing to say to their kids. But I think they really want to discourage their own children from going into teaching. And that is, again, a large reason for that is just the level of stress and the lack of respect that they feel within the occupation. So why is this a significant issue? Well, there's a couple of things that I want to point out. Number one, the higher teacher cortisol levels, and cortisol is that stress hormone that we experience when we are experiencing stress. We know that the higher teacher cortisol levels, the higher student cortisol levels, that there is a mirroring effect. This was actually found in a really fascinating study conducted in Canada, where they actually measured the cortisol levels of teachers in the morning, at noon, during lunchtime, and then at the end of the day. They did cheek swabs of teachers, and they did the same for their students. And they saw that mirroring effect, that teachers with lower cortisol levels had students with lower cortisol levels. And so this mirroring effect is having an impact both on the learning capacity, because we know that stress can be a large inhibitor of learning in our classrooms. And stress actually functions in the brain similar to trauma. And so we know that that trauma in the brain can really have a large impact on the level of learning that can happen in our classrooms for our students. We also know that higher teacher turnover equals lower student achievement. And this research was conducted actually in New York City public schools. And they found that schools with higher levels of teacher turnover had students scoring lower in math and in reading. And that was, for sort of looking at it beyond all other measures, that the higher the teacher turnover in those schools really impacted student achievement. We also know that relational trust in schools is the #1 key indicator in whether a school makes gains in their school improvement. This research was done in Chicago public schools over a 10-year period, where they really found, they looked at all of these measures and found that beyond all other measures, that schools that ranked high in relational trust, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that is, but schools that ranked low in relational trust made no gains in their school improvement, or even went backward on their school improvement goals. But schools that had high levels of relational trust made gains in their school improvement goals. And so when we look at all of these indicators, one of the arguments that we as an organization make is that if we want to invest in anything in our schools, we have to invest in the adults. Because we know that ultimately the adults and the level of respect that they experience for themselves, the level of stress that they experience for themselves, and their collaborative health that we have in our schools is the number one indicator on whether our school is going to be successful. We can change curriculums, we can change the ways that we teach in our pedagogy, but none of those things are going to have as great of an impact as if we invest in the overall health and well-being of the teachers in our schools. And so that's really where we as an organization have really invested. So I want to pause here for a moment before I jump into what we believe are kind of the solutions or the antidote to these very large issues. And I want to see if there's any questions that I can answer for you right now around this data, around this area of issues that we're looking at here in our schools. Are there any questions that we have out there right now, Kim?
Becky, I have two that came in the chat. The first one is from when I think your earlier slides with all the data. Someone asked, I missed the 206 information. What was that?
Yeah. So on this one, the 206, this is the number of teachers. So 200 teachers in 6 schools reported feeling the effects of secondary traumatic stress. So when they measured, they did a measurement in 6 different schools in this California area. And just in those 6 schools, there were over 200 teachers who reported the symptoms of secondary traumatic stress. And secondary traumatic stress, again, functions in the body similar to PTSD, which we maybe are all a little more familiar with, but it has similar symptoms like insomnia, anxiety, depression, all of those symptoms that are correlated in that.
Great, thanks. Next one is there current research on classroom size and its relationship to teacher satisfaction and appreciation, stress, retention, etc.?
Yeah. So we know for sure that classroom size does have an impact on teacher overall well-being and health. We know that hold on one moment, it looks like my screen got stopped sharing here for a second. We know that teachers do understand and do feel the impact of the feelings of there we go of classroom sizes. So we know that that ultimately that teachers do feel, sorry, I got a little distracted there, that teachers do feel that classroom sizes could make a large impact. That is one of the other significant factors that they would name, but it's not at the top of the factors. So interestingly, you know, it is a factor, but it is not at the top of the factors that they list as being most important.
Interesting. Next one is, are the statistics based on public and private schools? Is there any differentiation there?
Yeah, so I know that Launch Michigan did correlate between public and non-public. So they made sure that that was a representative sample from both public and non-public within their data.
Great. And then assuming the 46% stress is accurate, any idea how that may or may not differ from other occupations or professions?
Yeah, interesting. They actually have found that nursing and teaching have the highest level of daily stress experienced. So there is a correlation between actually those two occupations, and they have found that they have the highest level of daily stress of all what they would call service-focused occupations. So occupations that are really in that space of service within our communities. So yeah, nursing and teaching they've really found that they have a correlating level of high levels of stress.
Okay, next, there's a bunch here. I'm trying to keep them all straight.
Yeah.
Well, related question, are the statistics based on public and private schools? I think you addressed that. There's a question related to that though, as to whether or not there's any data conducted specifically for non-public or private schools, and if there's a significant difference there or any known trends.
Yeah, so I have not seen any data that is specific to just non-public schools. Most of the data that I have found is measuring it across and looking at it correlational, that it's really across a blanket statement. Now, I will say that we as an organization work in both public and non-public spaces, and also in charter schools as well. And so if we look at it, we're really finding that the levels of stress that teachers are experiencing is across the board in our different school systems. Honestly, what we have found is that the quality of relational trust in a building is the number one indicator on whether teachers are feeling like they enjoy their jobs in that building, whether they feel that relational trust between administrators and staff, and staff and staff, and then staff and community. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into what we believe are some of the key ways to address this. But we as an organization have really found that that's the number one indicator, not whether it's public or private or public or charter.
A comment that obviously also contributing to teacher burnout is the dropping of reading specialists, library media specialists, et cetera, other specialists that support teachers, because now we're expecting teachers to do those jobs as well. Certainly related to their stress level. A question regarding whether or not the studies show any difference based on grade level.
Yeah, no, there's not really a difference around grade level. I will say that when we look at teacher burnout indicators, that we are actually seeing individuals in the secondary levels regarding math and sciences leave the classroom more prevalent. And some of that may be because they're seeing that they have other options out there than staying in the classroom space. But we are seeing that as a significant issue. And part of that too, the significant issue comes in is that those are also areas that we're having a harder time recruiting individuals into becoming teachers in. So we're seeing significant staff shortages in secondary math and science in particular. And then also special education, and special education teachers are burning out at fairly high rates also, and we're having a hard time replacing them also.
Okay. Then there's a couple questions. I'm going to sort of group them all together, but and maybe you're going to discuss this in terms of solutions, but data and questions regarding how parental involvement may or may not affect the schools and teacher support, and how that plays a role.
Yeah, so I think we can all agree that parental involvement is key in any success of any kid. And as an organization, we have said, investing in relational trust and building relational trust with the community and with parents is really important. That relational trust gets parents more involved in the school education of their kids. But we also recognize that sometimes in education, we like to play the blame game on parents. And we know that in the current society and culture that we live in, there's a lot of parents who are just simply doing the best that they can. And that is maybe given the tools that they have, they're doing the best that they can, or given the time that they have, because they are maybe working second, third shift jobs. Maybe they're working 2 jobs in order to keep a roof and food on the table for their kids. And so as an organization, we've really tried to help schools really think about the ways that they can be relational vessels with parents and community, but also move away from the blame game and saying, oh, it's parents' fault that we can't teach your kids. And we have to really rethink that, because ultimately, I tend to believe that parents are doing the best that they can, given the tools that they have moving forward.
Awesome. There's a lot here, and I want you to be able to get to your solutions, but and you're probably going to talk about this, but a couple other comments are related to the impact teachers feel by being measured by student test scores,
Mhm.
and how that affects their job satisfaction, as well as administrators pushing out teachers who are at the high end of the pay scale into weaker subject areas.
Mhm.
And then some comments about how sometimes just a couple disruptive students take such an inordinate amount of time that teachers don't feel they're able to give the rest of the class their attention. And how do we address
Yeah.
that? So there's lots here, but you're
Yeah.
probably going to touch on some of that in your solution. So I'm going to
Yeah.
pause and let you keep going.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and if I don't touch on the impact regarding, for example, teacher, it's basically how we evaluate teachers and the evaluation system in our state. Please come back to it, but I do want to say that's a bit of a soapbox for me in the sense that the ways that we evaluate our teachers needs to change because it is not about growing our teachers, but rather it is about punishing our teachers in a lot of ways. Now, I want to say that with a caveat that there are a lot of administrators who have taken the tools that they've been given and have changed them to utilize them for growth rather than punitive measurements. And so we need to really emphasize to both our administrators and our policymakers that the evaluation of our teachers needs to be about growth. It needs to be about encouragement and not punitive. And that is a really big sort of, I would say, soapbox for us as an organization as well as we go into it. But I will keep moving because I think that hopefully I'll answer some of your questions around solutions as we move into it. So there are three sort of ways that we really view solutions in our schools. The number one is thing that we need to do across the board for all of our teachers is we need to help them build stress resilience tools. We know that the stressors in our schools are not going to go anywhere. Stressors in education have been around for forever. And while they have only escalated in our schools, they're not going away. And so we have to really focus on equipping our educators, what we would call with stress resilience tools. And I'll talk about those. Number two, we need to work on investing in our staff cultures. We know that a satisfied, a supported teacher within the culture of their building feels equipped and capable of meeting the demands of their days in ways that staff outside of in unhealthy and toxic cultures do not feel equipped. And then our third way of addressing this as an organization, and I'll talk about this specifically why we think this is important, but is in specific educator wellness coaching with teachers who are really struggling and who are feeling the impact of burnout or stress on their lives or their career. We feel that pairing them with wellness coaches is a really important and significant way that we can help address some of these issues. Now, I want to say this, that these three ways are ways that we believe working and investing significantly with schools and educators is the things that we can do as an organization. Outside of this, we also do the advocacy work and talking with the policymakers. And we encourage everyone in our communities to be advocates for our schools, to talk to our policymakers about how are you investing in the well-being of our teachers? How are you helping our teachers be the healthy, thriving adults that we need in front of our kids? But as we look at it as an organization, we believe that investing in these three areas really helps us to address some of the concerns that we saw on the slides previously. So the first thing that we do is we have really looked at this from a systems approach. And for those of you who are in education, this may look familiar to you, but let me kind of look at this a little bit. So when we look at a systems approach within our schools, we understand that the two center circles that hold all of our schools together is school culture and staff resilience. That the health of these two center circles is what keeps those outer circles functioning in effective ways. The outer circles are circles, though, that we have actually spent a lot of time in education investing in, and that is our systems of support and our classroom practices. In our systems of support, there's all sorts of acronyms that are out there right now, but two of the ones that are really invested here locally in our state are PBIS, Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, and then MTSS, which is Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. That kind of goes to one of the areas that someone brought up in the questions around what do we do with our students who have, if we have one or two really disruptive students in our classroom spaces, how do we help the rest of our students still continue to learn? And that's one of the things that we're really doing, is to invest in PBIS and MTSS.
Time out for 1 sec. We
Yeah.
are not seeing your screen. Can you
Oh, yep.
share your screen?
I'll try to share it again. Let's see. Here we go. All right, how's that? Can we see it now?
Yes,
All right,
thanks.
thank you. Yep. Perfect. So this is our systems approach to the school and building healthier schools. So in that systems of support, again, lives restorative practices, which is a way for us to invest in a healthier, I would say, discipline method of how do we solve and build up healthier practices within our classrooms. In our classroom practices, we've invested in things like SEL practices, social emotional learning. Some of you may have heard of programs around here called Be Nice, which is an anti-bullying program and and to help invest in healthier classroom practices in that way. Across the state, we have a Trails program that invests in SEL. So we've done a lot of work in these different areas around classroom practices and systems of support. It doesn't mean that these areas we have perfected by any stretch of the by any means, I should say, but we know that we need to continue to invest in them. But the areas that we have not invested enough in are those two center rings. And this is what we believe is causing these other things to really fall apart. When we walk into schools and see maybe inconsistent use of SEL practices or inconsistent use of the PBIS or MTSS systems, it's oftentimes because these two center rings are not healthy. And we are not seeing effective collaboration. We're not seeing healthy teachers implement these practices. I've been in a lot of classrooms, in fact, where SEL has been used in very sort of, I would say, negative ways, where we take concepts of respect that are meant to help us invest in kids to understand things like self-respect. And what does respect mean between me and my classrooms or classmates? I've seen it actually used in ways that are more about like, you will respect me. And that's a very punitive understanding of SEL practices. But I know also that the reason why that teacher was doing that was actually a lack of feelings of self-control, feelings of stress within themselves. And so they externalize that in these inconsistent practices. So as we move into this, one of the things that I said to you is, our first area of concern is building this, I guess you missed this slide too, but our first area is really investing in helping staff build these tools of resilience. And these tools of resilience really lie in these areas. First off, we know from research from the University of Harvard that they did sort of this understanding of what do resilient people really have. And they really broke it down into these three definitions: that resilient people have a staunch acceptance of reality, they have a deep belief that life is meaningful, and they have an uncanny ability to improvise. These are three qualities that we believe are really important for our educators to have as they move into these spaces. And then the tools or the skills that we really invest in helping them build are these 7 tools or skills. And these are, again, from research, we have found that these are the tools that resilient people really employ on a daily basis: self-compassion, empathy, vulnerability, courage, emotional awareness, a collaborative spirit, and cognitive flexibility. And so as an organization, when we talk about investing in and giving educators the tools of resilience, it really lies in these 7 areas. The definition that we use around resilience is that it comes from Star Commonwealth, and it's that resilience is the ability to achieve positive outcomes mentally, emotionally, socially, spiritually, despite adversity. That we can be individuals who are have the capacity to continue to grow, not become stagnant in spite of, or sometimes even because of, adversity. And we really invest in this through 2 methods. We look at it from an individual lens and from a communal lens. So we recognize that an educator's resilience is not just their job alone, but that it is a communal job within our schools. And we take this concept from the Navajo people who understand that seeking wholeness is a personal or an individual journey, but that seeking harmony is a transpersonal or communal journey. And that ultimately resilience really has those 2 components of wholeness and harmony invested in it. And therefore we need both of that individual work and communal work as we look at this. So what does that kind of look like? Well, one of the things that we really talk about as an organization is obviously stress. And we talk about stress that we experience as teachers and how does that impact us as teachers. And we know that stress and dealing with stress is a separate deal than dealing with the things that cause our stress. That to deal with your stress, you have to do what we call complete the cycle. And this is really a physiological understanding of the way that stress functions in our body. That stress is the physiological experience, whereas stressor is the external environmental thing that threatens to take us out of equilibrium. And so what we want to really teach our teachers is how to complete the stress cycles that they are experiencing every single day. And those stress cycles is that buildup of adrenaline and cortisol in our bodies, and that eventually that adrenaline and cortisol over time can have a really negative, harmful impact on our bodies. We teach them to deal with that stress in a couple of different ways, but 4 different ways that we do this is, number 1, physical activity. We know that physical activity is one of the strongest ways that we can deal with stress in our bodies. It is that sort of physical release of the cortisol and the adrenaline in our body. It can happen through that intentional walk at the end of the day, but it can also happen for teachers in just the walk around the building in the middle of the day. And they're paying attention to the ways that their body is processing the stress. So we help them build avenues to sort of really think about, how am I going to incorporate more physical activity in my day-to-day journey? Intentional breathing. And that's the practice of what we say mindfulness, but it is the paying attention to your breath in that moment without judgment. Is this understanding that our breath, this thing that we do every single second and oftentimes don't pay attention to or don't even recognize or realize that we are doing, has a real big impact on how our body processes the stress. That when we hold our breath or we hold in, we are actually holding in some of that stress. And so if we pay attention to our breath on purpose, we can actually release some of that stress. There's positive social interaction. And this is one of the things that I talk with teachers often about, is that it's about positive social interactions. It's not about the negative conversations in our lunchrooms. It's not about the negative investments in energy in the meeting after the meeting, is what we call it, right? So for any of you who've been maybe in a business meeting or in a staff meeting in a school, we jokingly call it the meeting after the meeting. That we get done with the meeting and then we go into somebody's classroom and we process what we all just talked about, but we process it more honestly in that separate classroom space. And what we want to invest in is the honest conversations in our classrooms or in our staff meetings, the more intentional, vulnerable conversations where we wrestle with some of the tough issues together naturally. And then the fourth one is what we call somatic touch. And somatic touch has been around for a long, long time, but it's really coming back into the forefront in research, and that understanding that there are actually pressure points in our body that we can push and press on to release some of the stress. There are apps out there that you can use, one called the tapping solution that really invests in sort of that processing of the stress. But there's also simple ways to do it. One of my favorite ways, and actually my 8-year-old son, it's really his favorite way to do this, is what we call the 20-second hug. And it's just this really tight, intentional hug where you feel the pressure on each other's body when you hug each other, and you count to 20. And at first, when you're counting in that hug, it can feel a little awkward because you're like, I'm about to hug somebody for 20 seconds. But as you get to that 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, you feel actually your body kind of relax and kind of melt into the other person. And that is your body completing a stress cycle. And you're allowing your body to sort of come back into equilibrium for a little while. Another way that I encourage teachers is to actually just go up against a wall and push as hard as you can and count for 20 seconds. And we can do this with our kids because certainly our students need to process some stress cycles as well. But as teachers, I say, just take a moment, push up against a wall really hard and count for 20 seconds. And you'll feel that sort of energy released from your body. And again, that's your body processing a stress cycle and coming back into equilibrium. And these are our tools that we can equip our teachers with to navigate some of that day-to-day stress that they experience. The second way that we think that we really need to invest in our schools is in that staff culture space, building healthier staff cultures. And we understand this in the context of relational trust triad, that there is an understanding that relational trust happens between and within each of these circles. And I want to speak just for a moment about that circle of community, because it is the one that is probably breaking my heart the most right now. And it is the hardest one for our schools as we look at the investment that we need to place in relational trust. The number of conversations I have had in the last 2 weeks with superintendents and assistant superintendents around their own safety because of the communal toxicity that they are experiencing is very frustrating for me. The number of people in our community who think it's within their rights to bully and threaten our school staff is just, it's mind-boggling to me. And the reality is that we have a number of superintendents right now who are worried for their own safety, who have security who takes them to and from board meetings, who have security who walks them from their office to their cars, and who actually have to follow them home. We have superintendents who actually have 24-hour security right now. And if we want to talk about the breakdown of relational trust in our schools, that piece, that dynamic right now is really difficult. And we have to understand that if we want to be have invested in successful schools, then we have to understand that as a community, it is important for us to invest in the health and the trust that we are building with our schools. Relational trust also obviously happens between staff and school leadership. And we know that there are oftentimes toxic relationships between school administration and our staff. And we need to invest in building healthier vehicles for communication, healthier understandings of this. One of the ways that we believe is important to do this, first off, is just by giving schools a snapshot of where they're at. So we have a staff culture assessment that we roll out into schools to give them some data to understand where they are right now. What does it look like for them to invest in it right now as they look in this space? And so we really want to give schools and districts an understanding of where they're at in this relational trust triad. They can look at it both from within leadership, within staff, and within community, and in that dynamic between each of these spaces. But we have to invest in those conversations as well as we move into these spaces. One of the ways that we believe that we can do this is rewriting the metaphors that we have in our schools. One of the metaphors that we rewrite and really think about is that space of what does it mean for us to be a healthy community and in this space. So we really invest in a new metaphor. We believe in a metaphor called the Aspen Grove. And this metaphor leans on an understanding from nature that our aspen groves really give us, which is this understanding of communal resilience. If none of you are familiar with aspen groves, they've been around for, some would say, thousands of years. In their living organisms, that if you look at a tree just individually, they look like an individual tree. But when you dig down beneath the ground, you understand that they are a network of interconnected root systems, and that these interconnected root systems really take care of and nourish one another. Even when danger or illness or disease threatens them, they're invested in them. And so we really want to rewrite the metaphors in our schools to understand themselves as really these interconnected communal spaces. The third way that we invest in this, and I know we're running short on time, and so I'm just going to touch on this just briefly, but this is a newer way for us, and that is our statewide educator wellness coaching project, where we really invest in those educators who are struggling right now. We do this in three ways. We have a personal wellness inventory where we collect the data on teachers in a whole district. We evaluate how a teacher is doing on their personal wellness inventory. We give every teacher confidential feedback. So from a district level, districts don't get back individualized data, but they do get back aggregated data because we believe that's important for them to know in order to make decisions on the well-being of their teachers. We have a coaching network of either current or former educators who are invested in a continuous learning model and therefore will be our coaches. And if some of you who are retired educators might be interested in that coaching network, please let me know. We are constantly looking for and recruiting new coaches into our network. And then we offer what we call our educator wellness coaching for those who really need the support. And again, this is elective for teachers. This is not mandatory because we believe that's one of the ways that we can respect our teachers is by giving them more choice on how to take care of themselves. But we have really found that this piece of it can be really impactful. I'm going to kind of skip through this, but these are the 7 factors in educator wellness that we measure in our personal wellness inventory that we can really assess and break down for educators to understand where they're at in their wellness. And then again, just, our coaches, the individuals who have been coached have really found that this has been really life-giving, transformative for them. And these are just a few of the words that we have been given back from those who have been coached, and saying like, this is something everyone should be able to do, that it is so important for them to have someone who supports them, encourages them, helps them navigate complex situations, helps them build better boundaries around their work as they move through it. So as we move into this, I hope I'm giving you kind of a snapshot. Obviously, there are so many different ways that we can invest in our education system, but these 3 ways, we really believe if we invest in the adults and in the cultures in our buildings, we can see transformative effects and impacts on both the burnout of our educators and the retention of our educators, and then ultimately the academic and the social emotional success of our students. So thank you. I think there was a link dropped in the chat box that allows you to join our mailing list if you are interested in that. They can certainly drop that link in there as well. Again, if you would like to join it, our mailing list is just a monthly newsletter that we send out. And so it's a way for you to keep on top of the work that we are doing. And if you want to check out more about our organization or reach out to us directly, I'll just put these up there. And then I know I wanted to be able to spend some more time answering questions. And so if you have time and you're willing to stick around, I'm willing to stick around to answer more questions. But I do appreciate all of you having me in here into your time together and allowing me this chance to share with you the work and the importance of caring for our teachers. So thank you for that. And Kim, I'll take some more questions if you have some.
Okay, I'll let people unmute themselves and ask that can stick around, but could you also throw up the slide that I think had the 7 skills of being resilient? Someone's asking
Yes.
for that. Thank you.
This one right here?
I know some of you need to go, so let me ask Marilyn to say her thank yous, and then those of you who want to stay on for a couple more questions, feel free to do so. Marilyn, are you there?
Thanks, Kim.
Sure.
Thanks, Rebecca, for sharing this important and timely information with HASP scholars. As citizens of the community, I hope we can become agents of change by supporting organizations like Opportunity Thrive and your work. Personally, probably just reaching out with a thank you or a little surprise affirmation for any of our local educators and administrators that we know, and then probably more importantly, advocating with our elected officials on the importance of this very, very critical issue. Thank you again, Rebecca. Really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you, Marilyn. So I am happy to take any questions that you might have. And so feel free to unmute yourself and ask your questions if you would like to.
There's
I've
one
got a question. Or any research done on the stress and other issues for college, university teachers?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, there is similar research being done. And I actually was working with the education department at Grand Valley State recently on their summer retreat. And I would say the data really resonated with them, but the research is similar. It's a different sort of, obviously, like for any of you who are retired professionals from the college university systems, you know, it's a slightly different beast than the K-12 system. But I would say that the stressors are similar in a lot of ways. And certainly we know from a relational trust and staff culture situation that has a really large impact also in our colleges and universities.
Rebecca, I had a question about one slide where you said $21,000 has to be spent when a teacher is replaced by a different teacher. I don't understand that. I never knew that there was an expense.
Yep. So when we think of, when they boil that number down, that has to do with HR costs. So the, you know, you have to think that every time an organization posts a job, it costs money. Every time that they go through the process of spending manpower hours in interviewing and rehiring, that costs money. And then the retraining and the investment that the school district has to place on retraining and investing in a new teacher, that estimated cost is also inputted in there. So when they put all of that funding together, they have found that really a district is spending about $21,000 in an urban or suburban district on rehiring of their teachers. And so, yeah, that impact, sometimes we don't think about the financial impact on the hiring process, but it's a very large impact on our schools and the amount of money that they have to spend on that.
Yes. Hi, Rebecca. This is Ellie Vance. And you spoke with the Women's Literary Club back in March.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And at that time, you mentioned that there was an immediate need, a real crisis. And you talked about looking at the state level, Governor Whitmer at that point was looking at a Senate bill, or we were looking at a Senate Bill 29, and I didn't get all my notes in there, but something about allocating funds for education. Do you recall that and what has become there?
Yeah. So some of you might be familiar that we have something called the Essers Funds that have come through the COVID Relief Fund to help schools navigate the impact of COVID in the schools. And those Essers Funds have been invested in schools to help them navigate things like hiring more mental health professionals for students. Would say schools have invested it in things like improving their air systems, air filtration quality systems within their schools. So all of those things have been given through the Essers Funds in that particular area. One of the things, and Ellie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, and one of the things that we've talked about is, we as an organization, we have been advocating at the state level for investment in this educator wellness coaching. And we were told that we would get some money through the appropriations part of the Essers Funds to
Yes,
allocate towards this wellness coaching. Yeah, so unfortunately at that point in time, the representatives felt like it was more important to pass a budget that was not line itemed. And so they wanted to do all the appropriations within it at selective moments throughout the year. And so we have not been allocated that fund yet. Trails, which is a statewide SEL program out of the University of Michigan, they were just finally given their allocation this summer, which they were a little nervous about not getting. We have been told that maybe we would be up for this next round of appropriations here in October. And ultimately, we are really looking at, for the appropriations that we're asking as an organization, we're asking for about 1.1 million to coach well over 500 teachers. So if you do that, if you really do the math on that, we are, I would say we're a pretty good return on the money if we can keep these teachers in the classroom, both from an academic and social emotional impact on our kids, but then also just a financial impact when we look at, if we were to replace those 500 teachers at $21,000 a teacher, what that impact would be financially. So we've asked for that 1.1. We're really waiting to get it still. So that's kind of where we're at.
Would we be able to do some follow-up with you to find out if you do receive that? Or is that sort of something that just kind of is a ongoing thing?
Yeah. So it is an ongoing conversation that we will keep having, but if you join our newsletter, we will for sure make that announcement when we do get that funding allocated. Otherwise, we're moving ahead with our coaching program. The difficult piece is that we just aren't going to be able to coach as many teachers because we're asking schools to fund it out of their general Title II funds to coach their teachers. And so we really want to be able to take some of that pressure off of our schools financially. And we feel like this appropriations is one of those ways that we can do that.
Excellent. Great. Will do. Thank you, Rebecca.
Could you now put up the screen with the areas you use in self-evaluation? Someone's asking to see that again.
Yeah.
And then Peg Van
I'm guessing this
Grauw.
one's it.
Peg
Yeah,
Van
go
Grauw,
ahead.
if you're still here, go ahead, hun.
Remember to unmute. So good to see you again, Becca. Thank you for what you're
Yeah.
doing. I have a
You're
lot
welcome.
of questions that I will ask you at another time, but I'm wondering how
Mhm.
large is your organization?
Yeah, so we as an organization, we launched 4 years ago. And honestly, when we launched, it was just myself and my board. I have 5 members on my board. And now in a very exciting movement for us, we were able to bring 2 new people on board this past summer. And then we have a group of, we call them our core 8 coaches who joined us this past year as kind of the founders in this educator wellness coaching project. So, I like to say that my team is all of those individuals put together. But as far as people who are paid by our organization, there are 3 of us. So
Remarkable.
that will give you a
How- how-
sense. Yeah.
How broad a population are you trying to serve? Are you pretty much local? Are you working with just the state of Michigan? How broadly?
Yeah, so we're just the state of Michigan. We at this point in time don't feel equipped to move outside of the state of Michigan, and feel like, given the state of education in Michigan, that we have a large mission in front of us. And so feel very strongly in staying in the state of Michigan as a nonprofit right now. But we started here locally. Our investment really was in West Michigan, and now we are moving out statewide in the next couple of years, beginning in this year.
One more for now.
Mhm.
And I'll just say cheers, wonderful work. Thank you for your
Thanks.
vision. Thank you for your commitment. Have you had contact with Brian Davis at the state level since he retired from Holland Superintendency? Because he's working with superintendents.
Yep. Yeah. So so he is working with the Michigan Association of School Administrators, and I've not had direct contact with him. We are going up to present at the state superintendent conference here at the end of this month, and working and navigating with superintendents at that particular conference. But I haven't had a chance to bug Brian yet, since he's moved on from Holland Public. But hopefully someday soon we'll get that opportunity.
Could be a real advocate with you, I think.
Yeah.
So thank you, and I'll be in touch.
Mhm. Yeah.
Maybe this is a good way to end. Becca, there's a question. Karen is saying that she has 5 educators in her family, which would be true of me too. Is there a resource that would help support them beyond our thank yous and gifts and such?
Yeah. So, there's obviously, I would love to recommend that her teachers and her family reach out to us as an organization, so that we can help advocate within her district and to get some of the training and professional development and coaching in their district. And so that's one way.
I lost you. You're muted.
There we go. Otherwise, there are some great tools out there for teachers, in particular around, I would say, mindfulness is a really big impactful program, and I would say recommending for them to invest in just practicing with some of the apps. So there's Insight Timer. There's obviously some of like Headspace, which has gotten a lot more publicity, but those are 2 spaces and apps that we recommend teachers really begin to use and utilize on a regular basis. But I do think, one of the biggest impacts we are really finding for teachers is that space of mentorship and coaching. And so recommending for them to find a coach or a mentor who can help them navigate some of the complexities in education. It's one of the reasons why we think our program is really unique, because it's either current or former educators who understand the complexities of education, who are coaching and mentoring our teachers. And so we realize and recognize that that's a really important aspect of it. And so that would be one of the things that we would recommend also in this space.
Great, thanks.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Those are good tips. It's very good to see you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Please
This is
say
excellent.
hello to your
Yeah.
family.
Yeah, I will.
You probably know that Abby is an up and coming teacher, so I'm going to share this video with her for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Please do.
And
Yeah,
you're right.
and
She's had a lot of people try to talk her out of it, which is so sad because I think she's a born teacher, but she's going to go for it. So thanks for your presentation. It was awesome.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. We need people like Abby to enter into the profession. So
For her.
we are in desperate need of them. So yeah. Well, thank you all for sticking around. I know I held on
Thanks,
to you
everybody.
for a very long time, but I appreciate all of you and this your commitment to this topic, and certainly, when we look at resilient individuals, that constant ability to grow and learn new things, HASP clearly is an example of that. So I'm appreciative of this organization also. So thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank you for your
everyone.
work, Rebecca. This is excellent.
Well done.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Mhm.
everybody.
Yeah.
Becca, I'll
you,
make sure I get the
Rebecca.
recording to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.